Hwei is a character that exists. Like many newer champions, Hwei suffers immensely from Riot's lore ban. Champs these days are released, given a basic biography, and maybe a short story if they're lucky. Because of this, so many plot lines and character threads have effectively ground to a halt, and Hwei may be one of the biggest examples of all. Even beyond that, though, his plot line was arguably never all that engaging to begin with. Released on December 5th, 2023, Hwei was a proper artist mage, a character that Riot had allegedly wanted to make for quite some time, but never fully got around to due to technological limitations. He can conjure spells not in the traditional manner of most mages, by actually channeling the elements, but rather by painting them and using a special breed of magecraft to bring his creations to life. Lukai Hwei was the heir to a school in Ionia that taught practitioners of this craft, aptly called paint magic. Fittingly enough, Hwei was particularly skilled in the art, but had a tendency to get lost in his own work. Paint magic demands a great deal of control over one's own emotions to wield properly, so for Hwei, letting his feelings and imagination run wild when using it was actually quite dangerous. The kid nearly drowned his mentors when painting the sea, and the only reason he wasn't expelled was because he was the temple's heir. Hui's formal training was made far more strict, but that wouldn't stop the kid from sneaking out alone at night to test the true limits of his power. By the time he reached adulthood, Hwei had actually achieved near-perfect mastery over paint magic. Even after inheriting the school, though, Hwei still felt as though there was a part of him that was being held back. Enter Jhin, the man who would go on to become Ionia's most infamous serial killer. We all know Jhin has a thing for art, so of course he and Hwei immediately bonded over their shared passion. Though of course Hwei didn't know Jhin was a murderer at the time. It was Jhin who finally unlocked Hui's true potential, convincing his fellow virtuoso to let loose the torrent of emotions that Hwei kept locked inside. Jhin proceeded to commit a series of atrocities that saw Hwei losing control of his power. At least I think that's what happened. Jhin destroyed some historical paintings and killed some of Hui's masters. There was also a fiery explosion on one of the monastery's lower floors. But the way the bio is written makes it a little vague as to whether Jhin was the one who caused that or if it was Hwei. Regardless, Hui's power was unleashed again amidst the blaze, destroying the entire school and everyone else within. Hwei was left conflicted. On one hand, he knew what had just happened to the temple was horrendous, and he was at least partially to blame. On the other, Hwei found himself admiring the beauty in the tragedy, the same sort of twisted beauty that Jhin sees every time he cuts a life short. Ultimately, Hwei set out to explore both sides of himself, using his magic to punish criminals and help the unfortunate. Hwei's story revolves around a sort of duality. Will he eventually become as twisted as Jhin, leaving only scenes of tragedy in his wake? Or will he embrace the beauty of life, seeking to protect Ionia's tranquility? This is the premise of Hwei's character, a struggle between his inner light and darkness. It's hardly anything original, but seeing the trope represented on an artist character is an interesting idea. That said, Hwei's playstyle actually revolves around a triality, and yes, that is a word. He paints by using not two, but three different subject matters: disaster, serenity, and torment. Furthermore, his ult is called Spiraling Despair. So clearly the guy is already leaning a bit more toward the darker side of things by default. While I can't really speak to how this functions in gameplay, I feel like the theme gets a little confused as a result. Like, disaster and torment effectively represent the same thing, do they not? The former gives Hwei's ability a fiery effect to them, reflecting the tragedy of his monastery going up in flames. The latter is Hwei haunted by the memories of that incident. Then you've got his ult revolving around despair, and it just comes off as a tad redundant. Maybe instead of disaster, they could have made it something like passion, which might be taken as a positive or negative context and would balance out as a more neutral subject compared to the other two. Really, though, this is all just beating around the bush before I talk about the elephant in the room, or rather, the demon. See, when Hwei was initially teased, a lot of people assumed that he was going to have some connection to the demons, otherwise known as the Ten Kings. For context, demons are the oldest and most powerful demons in League's mythos. We don't currently know a lot about them, but as said before, there are at least 10, and each one seems tied to a primal emotion. Currently, we know of two: Fiddlesticks, the demon of fear, and Ashlesh, the demon of joy. When Riot's April 2023 roadmap made mention of a depressed artist, a lot of people thought that this was going to continue the trend and introduce a demon of sorrow. Now, you might think that's a bit of a stretch, but there's a bit more evidence to back the theory up. The very next month, Riot Forge released Convergence, a game centering around Echo. In that game, players can find a variety of Easter eggs in the form of text logs. One such Easter egg is about the Ten Kings, and makes reference to three in particular: an evil scarecrow, a hyena sitting on a lake, and a shut-in with depression. The scarecrow is obviously Fiddlesticks, and the hyena, well, we don't currently know what form Ashlesh takes, considering that it's trapped, allegedly, in Neela's jar. However, we do know that the demon emits a constant laughter, like a hyena, and Ashlesh was, at one time, bound to a mystical lake beneath Neela's home. So, the shut-in with depression clearly alludes to a third demon, which one can naturally assume represents sadness or despair based on the description alone. The timing of this, after we had just gotten a teaser for a depressed artist, feels almost perfect. When Hwei's teaser trailer dropped, there seemed to be even more evidence to work with. See, the demons all kind of have this running motif with hands. Fiddlesticks can sprout multiple shadowy arms from itself, and Ashlesh, even bound by Neela, seems to be able to conjure hands made of water. And wouldn't you know it, at exactly 35 seconds into Hwei's trailer, we get this shot: the man himself surrounded by a trio of grasping, multicolored hands. Everything seemed to be pointing toward Hwei being or having some connection to the Ten Kings, a demon of sorrow. And then it turns out he just doesn't. Like, his bio comes out, and it turns out that the only demon haunting Hwei is Jhin. This feels like it's just such a massive letdown. The thing is, I'm not entirely sure how angry I should be over this. Like, it's entirely possible that the community just gaslit itself into believing Hwei was something he was never intended to be. But I don't think you can blame anyone for putting the pieces together given the timing of things. Even if that wasn't the plan, though, I do still think it's a wasted opportunity. Like, honestly speaking, was Jhin really a necessary part of Hwei's story? It honestly feels like he's only there because the two have the whole artist parallel going on. Being real here, Jhin as a villain tends to just get slotted into conflicts that don't really need him. But that could be a whole video unto itself. As for Hwei, I honestly feel like he'd just be a lot more interesting with a demon of sorrow clinging to him and affecting his art magic. Maybe you could say that Hwei glimpsed something he wasn't meant to as a child, and that opened his mind to the demon's influence. It could lead to an interesting dynamic with Neela, his total opposite, and I feel like Hwei would definitely have some unique interactions with Fiddlesticks. I guess that's really where the crux of the issue lies for me. Hwei's canon story isn't necessarily bad, but it just feels so lame compared to what it could have been. The pieces were set up perfectly, even accidentally. A young, talented artist who glimpsed an demon that proceeded to influence his creations. A struggle to ward off that influence. The destruction of the school where Hwei was unable to do so, and now he isolates himself in the ruins of his own failure to prevent the same tragedy from befalling anyone else. Hwei occasionally leaves, of course. The man has to eat and drink, and maybe occasionally get art supplies. On his brief excursions, Hwei finds peace and serenity in his surroundings. He uses this as inspiration to try and combat the demon's influence, painting visions of vibrant nature and bustling townships. But he must always return to the monastery to avoid presenting a risk to others, which in turn leaves Hwei open to visions of despair and grief that plague his mind. I'm telling you, this practically writes itself. How Riot managed to pass over this opportunity, I'll never understand. But what do you guys think? Do you think Hwei's story is fine as is, or do you wish he was tied to an Ur-demon? Leave your thoughts and comments down below, and until next time, stay bright.